So Heather, we're all settling in on some level to this new normal, at least that I think we all hope is as temporary as possible. There are some people, apparently, who have not settled in or are still, I guess, howling at the moon a little bit. And unfortunately, these people are governors, they are sometimes presidents, and they are looking to, I guess, ultimately, salvage the economy in one way as opposed to another way. And I think this is really, and we're going to be talking obviously about the sort of push to open up, as they call it, our economy and go back to business, as if that's the only way to maintain the economy and the economic well-being of Americans. And I want to make it clear as we go into this, and we will, we're this obviously this conversation dovetails with the most recent, I guess, addendum to coronavirus aid in terms of economic help. That these are policy decisions. We are not faced with a sort of binary choice of stay inside or stay, don't, semi quarantine and, or have people be able to eat and live their lives. There are other choices we could be making as a society that we are not. So people have to understand that as we start into this conversation, that this is not a simply a binary choice between saving lives and, if you will, saving lives and saving the economy. There's other options. We just choose not to pursue them as a country, and we can talk about that. But it's been rather extraordinary, as far as I'm concerned, to watch over the course of the past week and a half, Donald Trump encouraging these protests, and we'll talk about those, and then finally getting a bunch of red states to form their own compact. Let's just call it, for the sake of ease, the Confederacy, and them basically deciding that they're going to start the process of allowing people to engage in fairly normal activities, ostensibly under these sort of weird, impossible to maintain rules. And then to watch the president turn around and sort of undercut those governors who are doing this. It's been sort of fascinating.
It's been extremely fascinating. And the Trump reaction, we'll get into the details of what's going on there, but just that particular thing of him turning on them, I think is the most interesting. If there's a better illustration of the folly of being a Trump cultist, it's that, because he has absolutely zero loyalty. He didn't even try to defend Kemp, the Georgia governor, who he turned on in his coronavirus rally that he had, and they asked him about the decision to open up, and he absolutely threw Kemp under the bus. And that just shows you, where you are if you're a Trump cultist. You are just a tool for him in the moment, and he has absolutely no personal loyalty to you. And of course, on the bigger question, as you say, this is a real test. I think that the Confederacy compact that they have formed is serving as kind of an experiment, a petri dish, to see how many people they can kill without the whole state rebelling. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of that they would do, why they would do this. There's another thing, and that is that if they can get these people, if they can open up these businesses, and what they're calling, in Georgia, opening up tattoo parlors and hairdressers and the kind of things that are just really intimate interactions with other people. Nothing
Right.
could be crazier than that in this moment. And Georgia hasn't even come close to fulfilling the Trump guidelines on what you can have when where you should be before you start opening up, much less opening up these kinds of businesses. It's just absolutely just nihilistic and strange that he would do that to his own own people. But Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, is really not the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, he really is not. And I think that may be, apparently he didn't even tell his own task force that he was going to do it. He just did it. I was watching Fox, I guess, and decided to do it. But in any case, that one of the reasons, if there is one that's a bit more, strategic on their part, it's that if they open up businesses and people refuse to go back to work, they can deny them unemployment. And if businesses refuse to open up, they can deny them loans and other things that might get them over the hump. And a big part of this on the Republican side, I mean, they are absolutely behaving in evil fashion here, is money. I mean, they just really do not want to spend it. And it goes to what you were saying earlier, these choices that the country has. And the United States is in a unique position to do the right thing here because we have our own currency. This is not something that we should even be thinking about in terms of spending as much money as possible to keep people. I mean, we've got, what was it this week, 26 million people on unemployment now. I mean, it's practically unprecedented. And we're this is a totally unusual situation. None of the normal rules should apply, and including that, which is that, at this point, the federal government just needs to keep people with roofs over their heads, money coming in so that they can feed their families, and keep some semblance of the normal order financially so that when we get to this point where we can gradually reopen so that people aren't having to take their lives in their hands just to go out to, work every day, that you can come back to it without, a horrible, horrible hangover of people having lost everything. But instead, the Republicans seem to be intent upon using this as a way to force people into bankruptcy. I mean, Mitch McConnell even is now saying he wants states to go into bankruptcy. I mean, this is crazy talk. It's crazy talk. And yet here we are in a unique situation where we could totally do the right thing, do it with ease, really. It's not that hard. They just go to Washington. They start signing checks. It's really not that hard. And then gradually do everything the public health experts are saying, gradually reopen and do this, and, to the point where we can function again over the course of time as the virus is somehow, there's nothing we can do about the virus other than trying to keep people from getting it and to try and keep the health system functional so that they can take care of people who do have it and try to get all the, treatments and vaccines and everything else going as quickly as possible. But in the meantime, this is the job of the government. All of the governments, but the federal government in particular, can just write checks. And, so far, they've kind of done the minimum. And I just have a feeling we're going to run up against a wall here as you see these governors experimenting in their states with things like telling people, hey, we opened it up. You can go back to work. If you refuse, it's on you.
Right.
And the individual will then have to make this decision for themselves. And it's absolutely nihilistic and cruel. I mean, I'm lucky I work from home anyway, but, if I was forced to face that situation of having to go back to work or, lose everything, I don't know what I would do. I mean, I just don't know. It's awful.
Yeah, I mean, we have this dynamic in Florida where they have paid an infinitesimally, I've seen numbers anywhere ranging from like 4 to 15% of the unemployment claims are being paid in Florida. And part of it is that Rick Scott set up a system. 14%. And I think that could be even higher than it actually is. That's just in terms of people who have been able to file claims since March 15th. So 14% of those people. But one of the things we know about Florida, and we saw stories about this early on, was that Rick Scott set it up so that it was very hard to file claims. So you could be unemployed but not be able to file a claim because you've got to file it in triplicate. You've got to go back and they create all these obstacles so that they do not get the statistics that make them look like there's unemployment. And they did that under Rick Scott because they don't want to pay. And so we're probably looking at something that is closer to like 7% of the actual claims that exist in Florida. And Georgia has a very similar dynamic. They're up to close to, I've seen reports, maybe 1 million unemployed in that state. in the past 4 or 5 weeks. And they don't want to pay these unemployment claims. That's exactly right. And people should understand this is, and when Mitch McConnell says, yeah, let's let the states and the municipalities go bankrupt, this is all part of the same sort of austerity program, right? Like this is,
Right.
we're going to keep taxes low. Georgia did that, one of those like sort of Kansas style, we're going to cut taxes and we'll get more revenue. And that did not happen. We're going to keep taxes low. And we're going to use this as an excuse of, and this is the thing that, you know, and I had promised myself I wasn't going to get upset. But this is the thing that really gets me angry, because from day one, from minute one, from second one, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans are, and they don't necessarily land on it, but they're immediately into a mode of how can we take this event and create structural change out of it? You know, we heard a lot about in the Democratic primary of like, you know, of people talking about structural change. Who's actually going to make structural change? We want structural change. The reality is that the Republicans are excellent at this. And they know that the way that you do it is you create certain facts on the ground, you frame them in certain ways, and then you just let the chips fall where they may. So Mitch McConnell is looking to cut things like public sector pensions, right? For teachers, for police officers, for firemen, for city workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. State workers, we want to cut their pensions because that means that we can cut taxes on wealthy people in the states. And so by jamming them like this, you know, there was no funding for states or municipalities in any of these bailouts. The Democrats had to parade around like they were champions because they got money for hospitals. Well, the Republicans want to withhold money from hospitals so that cities and towns and states are drained of money to support their public hospitals. I mean, they are trying to restructure the way that state governments work so that, again, rich people get more money, get basically more free services from their states. You know, that's when we say cut taxes on wealthy people. What we're really saying is we're giving them free services, giving them more free services, whether it's roads for their businesses, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's an educated population, et cetera, et cetera. We're giving them more free services. And this is the game that they're playing. And on the Democratic side, and I didn't want to get here this quickly, frankly, but on the Democratic side, you know, Nancy Pelosi has to get basically shredded by everybody because the only thing that she's doing publicly is going on television and bragging about how much ice cream she has for her family in her unbelievably expensive twin set of refrigerators on national TV. And now, you know, she came out earlier this week on Wednesday, I guess, and said, no more Mr. Nice Guy. Well, I'm sorry. Did you think that Mitch McConnell was playing tiddlywinks through this? Like, I mean, where have these people been? And, you know, we're supposed to believe that now she's going to get tough because Mitch McConnell's gone out of bounds. No, she's getting tough because she messed up on national television, all the while doing nothing, and is realizing that there's some political blowback for this. Because on day one, if you don't realize that Mitch McConnell is not your friend in an event like this, after him telling Barack Obama, we're not saying anything about Russia influence, about Merrick Garland, about shoving through all these judges. Like, I don't know what it takes for, you know, and that's just giving her the benefit of the doubt of just being dim, as opposed to just not really caring about or afraid of any type of structural change. A case in point, we're going to subsidize Cobra instead of expanding Medicaid. That's the most expensive possible way you could do this. And the only reason why they want to do that is because after the crisis is over, supposedly, they can just pull back that support of Cobra and nothing changes. And this is just, it really is beyond misfeasance into malfeasance. And of course, you know, the Republicans are horrible, but, you know, At what point does Nancy Pelosi realize this? I think she already has. And she's sort of like using that as an excuse, unless it makes her look bad. I'm off topic a little bit because I still want to talk about this sort of pressure by the Republicans to open up. But I mean, we're just making choices as a society. And when one side is pushing the narrative to make one choice and the other side is pretending like no choice is being made, we're just making a choice as a society.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And this all does tie in. I mean, the fact, what you say is absolutely correct about, the Democrats' ongoing, impotence. And I don't even know what to say about it. I don't think Nancy Pelosi's naive. I don't think any of the Democratic leadership is naive, but for whatever reason that they seem to, and I cannot think of any other way to think about it, they cannot grasp that Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership, and I'm not even talking about Trump here. This has nothing to do with Trump. Has his own thing that's separate from all this that has to do with Trump only. This is the Republican project that I'm talking about here. That it's exactly as you say. It's like disaster capitalism only for government. Creating this structural change, using these crises for their own purposes, and Mitch McConnell and those leaders on that side, they are like terrorists. They take hostages of the American people. They are happy to see the hostages shot. This is the metaphor that works in this situation. That you cannot negotiate with that in any sort of reasonable fashion. I really believe the Democrats, because they know these people and they socialize, they see each other in the hall, they do whatever. They think that they're operating from a position of, that they actually do care about people in some level, that they are, like normal human beings. They are not. Mitch McConnell is not a normal human being. He just isn't. I'm sorry. He's an empty, soulless. The gravedigger of democracy is the perfect way to describe him. I don't know what kind of evil he is or where it comes from, but it exists. And if you do not understand that about him, that they are willing to see people suffer and die in order to enact their agenda, you can't responsibly or any way effectively try and stop them, number one, or to advance your own agenda. You have to at least grapple with that fact, and I just don't think I just don't see it. I don't see that they actually get that yet. This is after decades now, Sam. I mean, we've been talking about this stuff for a long time. It has nothing to do with Trump. It has nothing to do. This is their project. And when we're looking at what's going to happen with the American economy going forward in this crisis, what I see what this is analogous to is what happened in Europe after the financial crisis, where the Eurozone, where they actually, they look what they did to Greece and Spain and some of the other countries there with austerity. They basically decided to teach them a lesson, right? I mean, this was like, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to pay the piper now. This is going to they'll teach you, don't get too much debt, don't do this, that, and the other. And they created a mountain of suffering in those countries, and were partially responsible for the migration that happened from the Middle East. I mean, there was a lot of fallout from that. I mean, obviously, the situation in the United States is different, but they're treating it. When you see Mitch McConnell come out and say, put out a memo that's titled "Stopping Blue State Bailouts," that's what we're talking about here, because when he wants to say we're going to get rid of the pension obligations, we're going to make them, default on their pension obligations. You see Nikki Haley coming out with tweets saying, well, these governments needed to be responsible, and now they're going to have to pay. That's the attitude here.
She came out with tweets saying they have to be responsible like businesses who save for a rainy day. Every sector that we have bailed out, starting with the airlines, took every single extra penny they had and they put it right in their pockets years ago with stock buybacks. So the idea, I mean, they were making billions. Their CEOs were saying things like, we may never lose money again. Talk about acting like business. If the government acted like business, what we would have is, a lot of, like, I guess, taxpayers just walking away with a small number of taxpayers walking away with a ton of cash that they have
Or the
extracted
governors
out
and
of our.
lieutenant governors having gigantic windfalls every year, bonuses.
Here's the thing that I'm having trouble with, because you and I have had, it seems to me, the same conversation about Nancy Pelosi and about the Democrats, like you say, for decades now. And the idea that she could be naive to this is just, I'm sorry, I do not believe it. Now, maybe she is, but either way, it's like, for me, the Democratic Party has always been the most effective tool of, the very limited number of tools that we have that in terms of, like, political parties to pursue, an agenda. And, maybe Nancy Pelosi is completely naive. Maybe she's just like, has some type of ideological problem with things like, we could never, ever get away from Cobra. But either way, it's like, as a tool, I need a hammer, and she's a wet noodle. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, at one point, it doesn't matter. Like, I felt quite strongly when Tim Ryan was challenging her leadership, like, man, oh man, we don't want somebody who doesn't know what he's doing. And this guy's politics are not so great. Like, you know what? Maybe we do. Maybe we would be better off at this point in terms of Democratic leadership with someone who doesn't know what they're doing, someone who doesn't know enough to say, we're not going to hold votes. Actually, even though we had planned to allow members to vote in abstention, because I want total control of what we're doing. Maybe Tim Ryan wouldn't be so savvy to know that. Like, it's unclear to me that the value of Nancy Pelosi's savvy is really helping in this situation. You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
you may be right about that. I mean, it's possible that maybe the habit of negotiation in the way that it's been done over the past, and she's had wins and losses. It's not, she's not just been totally inept all the way along. But I think that maybe this habit of, they're looking at this, and I feel for the Democrats, I really do, because they were facing in this last round on the extension of the CARE Act for small business, that, you're looking at millions and millions of people just losing their businesses, just gone, it's over, can't do anything, we're not going to get it back if they didn't get these loans. So there's a sort of Damocles hanging over their heads with, you've got nihilist Mitch McConnell over here saying, yeah, whatever, we don't care. That's a tough position to be in. It's a tough,
let me just wait. It's a tough position if you set it up as the dynamic is like, we won't give you this. How about this? Mitch McConnell, why are you capping at $250 billion? Why is there a cap at all? This thing has been completely mishandled. We need to save small businesses. Republicans won't do it. We want an unlimited cap. No cap on this. I mean, like, the way they're approaching this is exactly the way you would go about it if you really didn't want to succeed. Like, there has been the loan program is a disaster, right? Like, the amount of money that went out is a drop in the bucket. You had maybe 4% of small businesses getting a loan or a grant, and who knows how much of that limited money was chewed up by companies that have CEOs that are making over $1 million, by companies that have, millions of dollars in revenue. And so, the Democrats come in and like, well, we need to get, some for hospitals. We need to have 60 billion of that 380 billion goes to low income folks, or goes to minority borrowers and whatnot. That's great. Absolutely necessary. But how about saying this? Unlimited. We won't vote for anything that doesn't actually help the American public. Like, they are trapped both in the Republican frame and their frame. Like, they are inhibiting their ask based upon a Republican frame of austerity. When they don't say we need why have no cap, all it does is set Mitch McConnell up to do what he did this week and come out and say, like, now we're actually going to start worrying about how much money we're spending. Because the Democrats were carrying half that water through this whole process anyways.
Agreed. And nothing could have been, we could have seen this coming. There was bound to be some kind of an economic crisis on the way, right? I mean, there always is something happening. And the Democrats not taking advantage of this situation where you had Mitch McConnell and the Republicans happily signing off on gigantic tax cuts and gigantic military spending, running up the deficit to, what was it, $3 trillion under Trump before this happened, and saying not a word and not using that as saying, look, the economy is going great, and yet we have this deficit. Gee, look at that. Maybe it doesn't really matter. I mean, to just completely turn it on a dime, it's changed the way Americans think about this. I mean, I've had this problem with even my friends trying to explain, and I'm no MMT expert or any of that, and I don't really want to get into it, but I'm just saying, look, we have evidence right now that we've got we have no inflation, no super low interest rates. We've got a deficit that's soaring beyond belief, and yet somehow none of the fallout that is supposed to come from that is happening. So that should not be a concern. And even more than that, even if you're just a normal person, we're in the midst of an unprecedented crisis, and the idea that anybody would have allowed Mitch McConnell to come out and even utter those words without there being a massive primal scream coming across the Democratic Party is really, really unfortunate.
What was Nancy Pelosi pushing a year and a half ago? She was pushing PAYGO. She was pushing PAYGO. Well, she is a Pete Peterson. She is a Pete Peterson acolyte. And so when we get into situations like this, I mean, she is a Pete Peterson acolyte. That to you and I sounds like an insult, but it's actually just a reality that she would embrace. This is the problem that we have now, is that we're trying to push against this incredibly malignant force of the Republican Party, and we're doing it with a limp piece of pasta. Because she accepts the entire framing that the Republican Party is using to essentially destroy any type of infrastructure, social infrastructure. And it's enraging. And there's no one now. Chuck Schumer's not going to do it. Joe Biden's not going to do it. There's nobody that is pushing this.
Progressive caucus, I mean, are they out there saying anything?
I mean, the only one so far who's saying anything specific has been AOC, and they're not going to have the opportunity to be held account for not voting for this because Nancy Pelosi refuses to allow a vote on anything. She refuses to set up an apparatus to have votes. She refuses to set up an apparatus to have any type of oversight. I mean, this is the type of control that Obama exercised running, in that summer of 2008, where he's going to shut everything down except for him. And we're supposed to trust them. And frankly, it doesn't work. It's not working. And it's infuriating. It is. And we're not seeing the outcry from anybody. And it's driving me nuts. It's driving me nuts. And honestly, I don't know what the answer is. The answer is not we're going to vote for a third party, but there needs to be more agitation against Nancy Pelosi. And she clearly, just at least performatively this week, came out like, no more Mr. Night Guy. We saw I don't know if it was Politico or whatever, piece was dropped. And that was because she realized how horrible she was in that James Corden video where, with her ice cream combined with everything else, it couldn't have been a better metaphor. But this is not where I want to go with this. But I'm sorry. I mean, it's just absurd. It's absurd. It's just patently absurd. And we should be hearing from Sanders and Warren and it just everybody has been bought into this notion of we'll do nothing and Donald Trump will lose on his own, which may be the case. But the fact of the matter is you're going to be completely screwed 2 years from now, just like we were under Obama, if you do not set up an apparatus in which to do something.
That is true. This is, if anybody's thinking beyond November, and they should be, because this problem that has been created, first of all, the virus isn't going to go away on its own. This is going to be something that could be with us for quite some time. But even beyond that, the fallout, the carnage that this thing has caused on its own, and on Trump's ineptitude and the Congress's inability to actually, force the kinds of mitigation that maybe would have made things better. The fallout is going to be absolutely epic if Joe Biden does become president, if they do take back the Senate, all the sort of optimistic views of what happens. The job that is going to be left for them is going to be horrific. And the idea, if they're not setting it up right now as using this, I shouldn't say using it. I mean, that makes it sound like it's opportunistic, but, and it's not.
Leveraging the crisis.
Exactly. If they don't understand that this crisis is being made far worse by all this stuff, and that they have to look ahead and see that, the education of the American public on things like public debt, the absolute, the total destruction of the Mitch McConnell project, that those things are going to require a new way of thinking. They can't just sit here and go, well, we're negotiating, we're working it out, we're getting in a room, we're hashing out the problem. That is not it's not adequate to the job. The job is going to be far, far more, onerous than anything we've ever dealt with before. I think this is completely unique, and it's going to require fresh thinking. And I think that that's what you're talking about, really. I mean, we're talking about a leadership, and this is going to be true in the White House, it's going to be true in the Congress, that is, it is absolutely paralyzed and sort of frozen in amber in thinking that is not adequate to the task, that it's from the past, and there has to be some fresh thinking here. And I'm sure that it's happening. I'm sure there are Democrats out there, and not just AOC, who I think is great, but I think there are others that must be thinking along these lines, that this is going to take a completely different approach to dealing with the Republicans and to dealing with the scope of these problems. I mean, even the most ossified person that believes somewhat in in Keynesian economics would say that this is a moment that you write blank checks, right? I mean, nothing could be more obvious, and yet we're arguing over limiting the amount of money that we give to small businesses. No. You write blank checks. This is what you do.
But here's the thing: is that when it comes to writing blank checks for the insurance companies, this is my point about this is my point about the Cobra. I mean, Cobra is the most expensive insurance product that exists. There is no other. It's like it's just automatically marked up by 25%. Do you know what I mean? Right. Like we don't have another insurance product that costs more than this. So if you were really worried about the deficit and the debt, you would say, let's expand Medicaid. Let's expand Medicaid. And you could say, now they're afraid to do it because they're afraid it won't be temporary. They're afraid that if they do it, that too many people are going to want it after we're back into some type of normalcy, but who knows when that'll be, right? I mean, honestly, who knows? We don't know. We've got now, close to 30 million people out of work, another 4 or 5 million this week. And there's no reason to believe that we're not going to see 3 to 4 million, just on a normal trajectory. And then at one point, there's going to be another wave where it bumps back up to 6 million. We're going to get to 40 million unemployed. Now, I don't know. Maybe it's possible because of the nature of the way that this has worked that, 6 weeks later, we open up and 6 weeks later and everybody's got a job and everything's fine. I find that very hard to believe. I also find it very hard to believe that we're going to be able to open up anytime soon. And by soon, I'm talking we could be in, we're not talking 2 or 3 months away on this. And so they are afraid of expanding Medicaid, which would be far cheaper, far easier than actually paying out cash to insurance companies. And that's what they're more afraid of. So, like, on one hand, she's an acolyte of Pete Peterson. She is concerned about pay-go. On the other hand, when it comes to paying for something that's actually less expensive and is an investment, right? Because you're building a structure as opposed to just, looking for disposable buckets in which to put money into. That doesn't happen. I mean, and there's nobody calling her out for this.
Well, I mean, I think it's very, I don't know why that is. It seems unusual. I mean, it's happening on sort of a, low-level activist level, I think. On social media you hear it. But I think within the caucus, they seem to be pretty paralyzed. I mean, that's how it looks to me. It looks like this total paralysis. And now, I understand on a certain level. You say, of course, they should expand Medicaid to everyone who isn't insured. It's just that simple. We're in a health crisis, for crying out loud. But people aren't working. They have no choice. Should just be open up Medicaid. We're going to deal with this. That's fine. But of course, Mitch McConnell will say no, they won't do that. Donald Trump will run with it and say, look at all these communists over here trying to, use the crisis to do whatever. This is where the problem is that Democrats are too afraid of that stuff. They're just too afraid of having Mitch McConnell call them, socialists. They're too afraid of all of that. And honestly, in a normal electoral cycle, in certain districts, the old thing, they've got up there in a swing district, they've got to be careful about what they say, blah, blah, blah. That's one thing. This is different. Right now is the moment to be saying this stuff. For the first time in many, 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 many moons, they have an opportunity to make a case to the American people right in the middle of this. We've got pictures of people waving Confederate flags and Nazi flags in the faces of nurses in the middle of the street. We have that. This is who Mitch McConnell. These are Mitch McConnell's people here. These are Donald Trump's people here. Are you one of them? Is that who you are? I mean, this is a moment where Democrats can make dramatic, sweeping statements. I mean, use their quote, bully pulpit to the extent that they have it, and they do have it. If they want to go on TV, they can. They'll be in any cable news show except Fox will have them on to talk about this and just come out swinging. And they can say this stuff. Now, I don't know whether it will move the legislation, but what it does do is that it prepares the public for a new way of thinking about this stuff. It prepares them for something that goes beyond November and just, gee, Joe Biden, don't say anything, just don't upset the apple cart and we'll squeak through in November and then everything will be fine. It's not going to be fine, and they have got to be preparing the American people for this. And I guess Biden can't do it because he is who he is and they don't want to upset that apple cart and they're worried about legislation. But, geez, there has to be somebody out there saying, look, I mean, having people from the Democratic Party out there saying we need to open up Medicaid and saying, no, COBRA is it's a ridiculous, moribund system to begin with, and nothing could be more. I mean, how are people supposed to pay for COBRA? After
that's
the
the
money
point.
drops up? What are they supposed to do? It's expect $2,000 a month. I mean, that's ridiculous.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this angle of what's happening in terms of the pressure from Trump to open up on these governors, but a lot of it is just a question of like who he can shift blame to and put pressure on the blue states, and that seemed like overnight in a matter of days, like literally 2 or 3 days this week, it seemed to shift from the sort of Trump as using this as a political force, because I think he started to see the polling, started to realize he was on the wrong side of this, and backed off it, undercut Brian Kemp. His guy Collins, running for Senate in Georgia, backed off it, and who knows, maybe the attempt by Betsy DeVos and other Tea Party backers, to get like white supremacists and militias to get out there and protest about these closings. Maybe they back off that way and they try and do it legislatively, like through McConnell, by saying like, okay, we're just not going to bail you out, blue states. We're going to make the blue states hurt. I mean,
exactly.
we will get a better notion next week if there has been this shift or if this was just like a hiccup in terms of this strategy, because the White House and the Republicans are, despite the complete, I think, failure of Democrats to grasp and seize the moment, they're concerned, and rightly so, about what's going to happen to them in November. But Digby, I know that you will be home next week. I also will be. And so thank you as always. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you next week.
You too, Sam. My pleasure.